In 1971, a psychologist rented a basement and turned it into a prison. No real inmates, no real guards, just 24 college students, a coin flip, and 6 days that went completely wrong. The Stanford prison experiment is one of the most famous studies in psychology history. You've probably heard the basic version. Normal people put on guard uniforms and became cruel. Normal people put in cells and broke down completely. It proved that situations turn good people bad. Except that's not really what happened. The real story is messier, darker, and more disturbing than the version they taught you in school. Philip Zimbardo was a psychology professor at Stanford University. He wanted to study how institutions shape behavior, not criminals, not disturbed people, ordinary young men. He advertised in a newspaper for volunteers willing to participate in a study of prison life. 75 people applied. He selected 24 who were judged mentally stable, healthy, and average. Half were randomly assigned to be prisoners. Half were randomly assigned to be guards. The prisoners were arrested at their homes without warning. Real police officers showed up, handcuffed them, put them in squad cars. Neighbors watched. The prisoners didn't know it was coming. That was intentional. Zimbardo wanted the shock to feel real. The basement of the Stanford Psychology Building became a mock prison. Cells were made from converted offices. Prisoners wore smocks, no underwear, and a chain around one ankle. They were given numbers, not names. Guards wore khaki uniforms, mirrored sunglasses, and carried wooden batons. The sunglasses were important. They prevented eye contact. They made the guards look less human. Zimbardo himself took on a role. He became the prison superintendent, not the scientist observing from a distance, the person running the institution. That decision would matter more than anyone realized. Within hours, the guards started testing limits. By day 2, the prisoners rebelled. They barricaded their cells and shouted insults at the guards. The guards responded with fire extinguishers. Then came the psychological pressure. Guards forced prisoners to do push-ups, sometimes with a guard standing on their back. They disrupted sleep with middle-of-the-night counts. They used solitary confinement. They made prisoners clean toilet bowls with their bare hands. They took away mattresses as punishment. They controlled when prisoners could use the bathroom. Some guards became sadistic. Not all of them, but enough. And the others watched without stopping it. By day 2, one prisoner had a complete breakdown, uncontrollable crying, screaming, rage. Zimbardo and the research team assumed he was faking. They thought he was trying to get out of the study early. He was eventually released, but only after significant distress. He was not faking. More prisoners broke down in the days that followed. Several had to be removed early. One developed a psychosomatic rash across his entire body. The experiment had been designed to run for 2 weeks. It was stopped after 6 days. Here is the part the textbooks usually skip. Zimbardo was not a neutral observer. He was embedded inside the experiment. He had designed the prison. He ran the prison. He had a personal stake in the experiment continuing. When a graduate student named Christina Maslock visited the prison on day 5, she was horrified. She told Zimbardo what he was doing was wrong. She was one of the only people who said that out loud. Everyone else, researchers, assistants, observers, had been absorbed into the prison logic. They stopped seeing the prisoners as people in distress. They started seeing them as inmates causing problems. Zimbardo later said Maslock's reaction was what finally made him stop. He married her the following year. The experiment became one of the most cited studies in psychology. It appeared in textbooks, documentaries, TED Talks, and 3 separate films. The lesson everyone took away was situational power. Put good people in a bad system, and the system wins. But then researchers started looking more closely at the actual data, and the story started falling apart. In 2018, recordings of the original experiment were uncovered. They revealed that Zimbardo's research assistant had coached the guards before the experiment began. He told them to be tough, to be firm, to not let the prisoners push them around. This was not in the published study. The guards were not simply responding to the situation. Some had been told how to behave. Other recordings showed Zimbardo himself pressuring prisoners who wanted to quit to stay inside the experiment. He reminded them they had signed a contract, that they couldn't just leave. In reality, they could. They were volunteers in a psychology study, not actual prisoners. But some of them didn't fully understand that. and Zimbardo let that confusion stand. Former guards later gave interviews saying they had consciously performed a role. They had watched films about prison. They had thought about how a guard should act. They were not transformed by the situation. They were acting. They were playing the part they thought the experiment needed. That doesn't mean no real harm was done. The prisoners who broke down were genuinely suffering. The sleep deprivation was real. The humiliation was real. But the clean scientific story, normal people automatically turn cruel under institutional power, was more complicated than that. So what did the Stanford prison experiment actually prove? Probably not what you were taught. It didn't cleanly show that situations override personality. It showed that people follow instructions from authority figures and that scientists can get too close to their own research to see clearly. It also showed why ethical guidelines in psychology exist and how a story can become so clean and satisfying that people stop asking whether it's actually true. Philip Zimbardo spent decades building his reputation on this experiment. He wrote books, gave talks, and testified before Congress about prison reform. When the criticisms came, he pushed back hard, defending his methods and arguing the core findings were still valid. Maybe some of them are. Maybe environment does shape behavior in powerful ways.